remember that whole settlement thing with Florida State, Clemson, and the ACC? You know, the whole lawsuits in multiple states. That seems like it was a lifetime ago that news came down that the settlement was here. But what about Florida State's future? Its immediate future and medium-term future. That's still up in the air. Joining me, the founder administrator of Warchant.com. He's Gene Williams. My name is Tom Lang, and you can see at the bottom of the screen here on Warchant TV. Hit that like button. Early exit? Okay, we'll get to that in a little bit. But Gene, welcome aboard. I think it's time that we revisit this discussion.
Yes.
Spring football is back. We've set the table for that. That's going to be a fun month ahead. But we're not quite done here with Florida State, the future of the university as it pertains to what conference they're going to be in.
Yeah, really, it's going to be an ongoing discussion. There's a lot of stuff. The nice thing is the deck has been cleared now. I mean, I think before, look, whether it's a Big Ten, SEC, whatever it's going to be, they are not going to touch Florida State or Clemson or anyone else with a 10-foot pole while this was going on. I mean, for one, even the GOR, as it was stated, it was close to $600 million to buy that out with all the penalties and stuff. That's just, it's not feasible. So that was out the window. You got pending litigation. I can guarantee you those conferences don't want to get involved with that also. And at the end of the day, the ACC, under that, if the contract held up, didn't even have to sell those rights back to Florida State. So it really was a non-issue to even discuss what conference they're going to go to or even to begin those discussions. Now that's open because the way they structured this deal, Tom, and we do it, I'm going to refresh everybody again, and we can maybe put up a graphic to show it. I initially thought everything I had heard was there's going to be a big drop-off in 2030 because they wanted that stability to keep the conference intact, at least semi-viable until that point. Well, that's what it really changed everything when they came out with that structure. Well, it drops. It starts at $165 million now and drops $18 million every year till you get to that $75 million in 2030. So that sliding scale slowly gets better every year. It becomes more and more viable to leave the conference, and I think that's what we're going to talk about today because it opens up some possibilities and some early rumblings we're hearing. I think the fans are going to like how this may end up playing out.
Yeah, we'll hit on that here shortly. But again, Gene's right. $165 million if Florida State wanted to pay to leave today, technically, in the fiscal year of 2025, 2026. You could leave at $165 million. We will wipe up here a graphic from, and we got to credit somebody on Twitter here. This is TJ Altmore. We appreciate him. These are the numbers at play for Florida State to consider over the next few years, because when we say early exit, Gene, we're speaking about on time, like what's on time. 2030, when it's $75 million to walk, we would consider that to be quote unquote on time. An early departure would be before the year 2030. And so here are some of the facts and figures that Florida State has to consider relative to its opponents in Power 2, relative to Notre Dame, obviously, as you can see on the screen there, when they're doing Economics 101, Gene, a cost-benefit analysis on when it would help them the most to leave. Maybe, just maybe, and this has to be some of the consideration, Gene, you might make a little bit less money with a partial share in the Big Ten or the SEC in the next year or two, if you left sooner. But now your future is secured. Much like what Oregon and Washington did when they joined the Big Ten, they didn't get the same deal that USC and UCLA got. But they knew that their long-term future is absolutely secure because it's going to mature to a full share, and they don't have to worry about anything anymore when it comes to big-time college football revenue. So they said, all right, we're going to take a haircut in the interim, but this is going to help us long-term. Florida State might have a similar bit of math to do over the next few years when it's deciding about, should we pull the trigger now at $147 million, at $131 million? When should Florida State pull the trigger? That's the discussion that they're going to be having behind the scenes and in conjunction with these Power 2 conferences.
Right. I think you bring up a good point there. There's running the numbers, and at some point it becomes financially viable, but there's also the added bonus, like you pointed out with those other schools, knowing the certainty of your financial future and being able to plan when it comes to NIL, stadiums, scholarships, all the other places where you desperately need this money for your athletic program. You need to be able to plan years in advance. They can't really do that right now. You don't know what that's going to be when they're going to leave. So, I mean, that certainty, maybe you take a little bit of a loss for a couple of years to do that. So let's run through the factors real quick on what are the financial things for Florida State. I mean, it starts out at, look, the new incentive the ACC threw out the ratings-based revenue sharing model. Florida State expects to receive, and probably Clemson, 15 to 20 million more per year. When you look at estimates, and trust me, these conferences hide stuff. They don't like giving these numbers out. And eventually they file taxes and we get the numbers. So it's hard to get an updated projection, but I've seen 45 to 50 million for this one Florida State's on right now per school in the ACC. You throw in another 15 to 20 million there, Tom. What you see in the SEC and Big Ten, that's at the big boys table. You're right there, pretty close to them. But as this shows, this is an estimate, I think, over the next 5 years, what that's going to be like. Obviously, that revenue gap every year is going to grow. So every year, not only is that penalty going down, the gap is getting larger, which incentivizes you doubly every year to get out, more than the year before that. So that's a big factor. And the other thing, like you mentioned, the big factor is going to be the negotiations. Let's just say it's the big, I'm going to go ahead and say, look, right now their talks are with the Big Ten. That's not a surprise. Most people realize that. I think the SEC is waiting to see what happens with Florida State. But then the next big consideration, and probably the largest consideration right now, is what you alluded to. It's that share. Because the new TV contracts with Fox and all those are going to happen in 2030. And that's when it's a lot easier to bring in a school, because they can raise whatever they're going to do for the payout per school and figure all that out. It's an easy transition to come as a full share. But are they willing to give more? How much of that partial share is going to be? Is it going to be a quarter, a half? I mean, that's going to make a huge difference in the calculus to figure out, is it viable to leave 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever that is. So that's where we are, Tom. And so those negotiations are going on right now. How much that share is going to be crucial to finding out what date that is going to be.
Well, and that's what this settlement did, was it afforded you the opportunity to have these negotiations out in the open, because it's allowed. All Florida State has to do is pay an exit fee at this point. No grant of rights is in play at all. It's a one fee situation, and it's every dollar, every cent at $165 million. There's no attachment to it. And the same thing as it graduates or declines, I should say, at $18 million increments until that $75 million fee is becoming the reality in 2030.
And real quick, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but let's be clear. When we talk about 165 or 75, that's not being paid in a chunk fee. It's just like when you a coach, just like with Willie Taggart or anybody else, you let him go. You're paying that over years and years and years. So don't think Florida State's got to write that check the day they put in their notice they're gone. That's
a huge point. Liquidity. You don't have to have it. I mean, you could even look at a recent example. It was a 1-year buyout, but Texas and Oklahoma had to pay $50 million to the Big 12 in order to leave 1 year early for the SEC. That was a fixed buyout against future earnings. So it even said future disbursements that it gets from its new home, it can pay out the $50 million. As it turned out, I think ESPN paid a large portion, if not all of it, to facilitate that move, because it was in ESPN's best interest to get that game moved sooner. But really quickly, before we get into the buzz here, just take a look at the figures. If these things are true, and I know, Gene, this is frustrating, because typically when you get those fiscal year tax returns, they're like 2 years in the past. You have to do a lot of projections moving forward. But look at these basic figures, and you can see, we'll compare it to the SEC, because I think everybody is comparing Florida State down to what's going on in Gainesville, and you're looking at the deficit operating between you and your arch rival. All right, $52 million for the ACC. Let's say Florida State maxes out and makes $20 million in terms of both brand initiative, success initiative through the ACC. You're at 72. So you'd be operating at a $17 million deficit to your neighbor down south, to Florida. A $17 million annual
best case scenario.
Best case scenario, yes. Annual deficit of $17 million against Florida. And so that's where you would do the math here, because if you get a partial share, Gene, maybe you're operating for 2 or 3 years at a $25 million deficit to Florida, or a $30 million deficit to Florida. But then, after that short period of time is over, you're going to be either dollar for dollar with Florida, or if the Big Ten continues to be the market-setting entity, outpacing your rival. So that's exactly what Florida State has to look at here, is we're already going to be down to the tune of $15, $20 million a year, best case scenario. What's another 5 or 7 if you make this thing happen sooner? I think that would probably be the discussion they're having behind closed doors, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also when you look at that chart, I think one thing you got to factor into is that additional money from playoffs. And we have not, assuming they go forward with a guaranteed number of SEC and Big Ten schools, that green payout is only going to get bigger. So, I mean, again, another factor in that widening revenue gap. It's really going to, now here's the thing we want to get into. We've been kind of, I know, bearing the lead a little bit here to talk about. I have been hearing some buzz. I mean, I've been hearing it really before the settlement, but I think we know stuff is ramping up with the Big Ten right now in terms of going. I don't think it's a matter of, now, it may not sort of be the Big Ten, but it's not a matter of, are they leaving? They're leaving, and not a matter of 2030, but I think it's a matter of when they're leaving before 2030. I think everything we hear, reading the tea leaves, Florida State's going to be out of the ACC well before 2030. So the question is, again, it's this calculus, and there's no definitive way to say this because there's too much going on. There's so many variables to go ahead and lock it down. That said, I'm going to go ahead and give an educated guess. If I'm off, you can come back and blast me. The good news is I've got a couple of years until that happens. So I'm going to say, look, just because I know dealing with complicated litigation and these kind of negotiations, and this is on a giant scale with Fox and all the networks and everybody else going on. So I think even though a lot of fans think you can just, they had a site today, put in their notice and go out, it just doesn't work that way. But I really feel Florida State will be in the ACC this year, next year, and that's it. I think they're gone at that point. So I'm saying only 2 more years based on kind of just a little intuition, a little bit on what I'm hearing. And that's when I think when it becomes viable, when reports start leaking out that the Big Ten has offered Florida State, and let's say, and I do think it's going to be a lot closer to a full share than a half share. Again, intuition, a little bit of what I'm hearing. The Big Ten seems very anxious, and I want to talk about that in a minute, why the Big Ten is so adamant about Florida State. But yeah, I really see that playing out that way. And again, the numbers, I think it's in Florida State's best interest from all the stuff you saw, especially if they got some people helping out, whether that's another network, whether Fox or whoever else wants to chip in a little bit of money to help defray that penalty, whatever the case is. But they're in a great position right now to make that jump. And then we see when that comes out, what is the SEC's response when they know the writing is on the wall that Florida State is getting on the plane, they're getting ready to fly to Big Ten country. Do they get on the runway and say, stop, wait a minute, no, this can't happen?
Yep, exactly. That's the whole thing here is you've heard a narrative around the nation that Florida State is not a valuable brand. Florida State is a valuable brand at an unbelievably high level. If you talk to people inside ESPN, and I'm robbing Jeff Cameron's information here, that's why I was kind of pausing, but I'll credit Jeff. He has contacts in Bristol that we accrued from when we worked at on the radio side of things. Remember, he broke things on SportsCenter. So, Jeff, appreciate you for this information. There is a brand value tier at ESPN and a brand value tier for all sports in terms of, hey, we need to prioritize time slots for Yankees, Red Sox, and baseball, which they did ad nauseum for years and years and years. Same thing, college football. Alabama's in that top tier, Texas is in that top tier, Notre Dame's in that top tier, Michigan. You know the players. There is a second tier beyond those non-negotiables. Florida State is at the top of the second tier, which means you're in the top 10 brands in the country. Top 10 brands, bar none, in the country.
And that's all they care about. They don't care about your wins or losses.
No, and this isn't a Greg Sankey decision. It's not a university president's decision.
Exactly.
It's the networks that make the call. And so here's the other economics 101. If I've got a market cornered in a growing state, a state with a lot of rich people that live on the coasts of the peninsula, I can sell a lot of good things to people in those states. So that means that my ad revenue, the ask that I'm getting for the 3:30 window on ESPN, the 7 p.m. window on ESPN, I'm getting sponsors and calls that the Big Ten doesn't. Unless the Big Ten grabs a brand out of that footprint, specifically the state of Florida. Yeah, there are Big Ten grads, Gene, that live in Orlando and they live in Tampa, St. Pete, and down south, but it exponentially grows the opportunity for sales and revenue. If the Big Ten didn't just have alum there, they had schools there, and they had schools in the southeastern footprint. And that's why, Gene, they are the instigator in this whole process. They're the one that gets this whole thing moving if it's going to happen sooner than 2030.
You took all my talking points, Tom.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No. It's great. That's good to know we're on the same page. But no, I think you absolutely nailed it. I always laugh when I read it's a Paul Feinbaum or some other SEC show writes this thing. Well, they've got Florida Gators are down there. They don't want Florida State or anybody else, but they don't mention. Then wouldn't that mean that the Big Ten would really want to be in the Florida market then? Because they don't. Last time I checked, there's no Big Ten school in Florida, like you mentioned. Not only a huge, giant, growing state, but football crazy, as we know. I mean, it doesn't make, of course they want it. And again, I'm glad you pointed out because I still hear this occasionally on our message boards or on social media. Well, the college presidents, blah, 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 blah. What did Fox do? It was like $6 billion or something. You don't think Fox is calling the shots? There's some Northwestern presidents go, I'd rather not have Florida State in our conference. They're going to tell them to, go pound sand. We're making the call here. And Fox, desperately, I was going to bring that Fox wants in here for so bad for the reasons you stated, for that market, for that to truly be a national conference. And I was told in terms of advertising, having a true coast-to-coast presence and all the time slots you stated, I mean, that's covered a lot of ground, and that opens up a lot of things where the SEC is still a regional advertising base. So it opens up the whole world. Plus, added bonus, you stick it to your rivals in the SEC and ESPN.
Well, and what you're doing is you're accruing assets, I think, for the reorganization of the sport. Now, this is like another video for another day. But this whole thing's going to get reorganized at some point, I think, in 10, 15 years, if not maybe sooner. And you're going to get the power to, it's going to reclassify above all other, NCAA sports. But you want to have more good things so that you get the better deal when it reorganizes. I think that's what's going to come down eventually. But yeah, Gene, they're not looking for a Yellowwood sponsorship in the Big Ten, but they are looking for Chick-fil-A money. And they are looking for national car dealers, and the more clients, this is it, man. This is economics. This is how we sold. We're in a podunk market 150 radio.
No more
station.
alien tape commercials.
No, exactly. This is how you sell it on market 150 radio station. It's how you sell at this level. Mm-hmm. The more potential clients you have, the higher the rates can be. The higher the rates are, the more money everybody makes. And these networks are equal partners with the conferences in terms of payouts. They want more money. Florida State can bring the Big Ten more money, but the SEC knows that. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole thing here, Gene. So the buzz you're hearing is that the Big Ten is indeed
and they want it to happen sooner rather than later. I think they see, like you said, that asset they really want. They want to capture it. There's no reason to sit around and wait 5 years before locking that down. Get it in now before the SEC wises up and realizes what they're doing. So yeah, I think it's gonna happen pretty fast, and it's gonna be an exciting time for Florida State because regardless, I think every single fan, I don't think there's anybody, is there anybody left that still wants to be in the ACC, Tom? I think everybody wants out.
No.
So it is gonna happen. It's gonna happen pretty quick. I know it's not gonna happen right now, but it is gonna happen a lot quicker than we really realistically thought while this litigation was going on just a few months ago.
It's okay. So what I'm hearing here is the home and home with Alabama is probably safe. That one with Georgia, that might not happen, at least not as an out of conference home and home.
Well, unless they start the AC or the Big Ten SEC Challenge.
That's correct.
Let's start that one up. I mean, imagine that opening weekend. I mean, I know. Look, again, off on a tangent, another thing, but I know they had that couple of those early Saturdays, and it was just all when college football owns the landscape of sports. Why not start out with a Big Ten SEC Challenge? How much fun would that be?
I think that's coming. The networks, look, they work together on other things. It's not like they hate each other, and it's the Hatfields and the McCoys. I know that's an old reference, but I mean, look, when it comes to the NFL, when it comes to golf coverage, and the NBA has its own split of 2 or 3 networks. The NHL has its own split of 2 or 3 networks. These guys golf together. They work together all the time. So I could absolutely see that coming down the road. It's just that, according to Gene Williams, put it down right here. And if in the comment section you say, you're nuts, Florida State's worth nothing, go ahead.
Let me have it.
Leave us that comment. Be Brett McMurphy. Be, who was the guy? Matt Hayes. You can echo those people. That's fine. Leave a comment underneath. Hit the thumbs up here. But Gene is telling you, in a couple of years' time, it doesn't sound like Florida State's going to be paying $75 million to leave. They might be paying a little bit more to get secure sooner. So, Gene, I'm going to ask you before we sign off. I know these things are fluid. The Big Ten is the instigator. Do you feel like the Big Ten is the favorite, though, is the favorite to land Florida State? Just March 23rd, 2025. Don't kill us, folks, if it changes.
You know, I have to think I mean, if I'm a betting man, they've got their foot in the door right now. And what I hear, it's good. We're getting good feedback. Florida State's getting good feedback from them. So, I mean, if I had to bet, I would say it's Big Ten at this point. But again, I can't get into the minds. There's got to be, like I said, it's not even Greg Sankey. It's somebody at ESPN at some point. I don't know what they're thinking. Obviously, right now, there's somebody at a high level discussing this hypothetical over and what our response will be. So I don't know. I can't read their minds right now. But if I had to guess, just because the talks it sounds like the talks are going well, I'm going to say Big Ten.
Spare us the AAU requirement. That's already no. That's not a thing anymore, folks. Nebraska's not AAU. Florida State's academic profile is going through the roof as well over the last 10, 15 years, if you look at it that way. All right, so if you've got any more thoughts, please leave us a comment underneath. And then also, if you want to become a member of Warchant TV, Warchant Premier is what it's called. You can hit it right underneath where I am on the screen. It says join, and you get really cool add-ons like members-only videos, emojis, all kinds of great stuff. We'd love to have you as a part of that level of Warchant TV. But as always, it's going to be free here for y'all on Warchant TV. So subscribe to the channel. We're over 50,000 strong. We want you to be part of us as well. We'll be here for tons of Florida State spring football coverage this week. Stay tuned. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, interviews, analysis, and all that kind of stuff here, right here on Warchant TV. Gene, thanks for your time as always.
Bye, ACC.